Right, welcome to episode 8 of this series where we're looking at spiritual life and spiritual formation and how do we create the kind of life, build the kind of life which is truly deep and fulfilling and meaningful. We paused last week to look at a reason why sometimes putting into place practices which promote spiritual health are sometimes difficult, and sometimes we hesitate with them, and sometimes they feel like a bit of a slog. And now we're jumping straight back into Sabbath, which we started to look at a couple of weeks ago. If Sabbath is a new word to you and it makes no sense, then stop here, go back to episodes 5 and 6, and hopefully that will catch you up. But maybe you need a bit of a memory jog to remember this Sabbath, this ancient original principle of stopping, of involving ourselves in the creation rhythm of work and rest and play and joy and work and rest, instead of continually being on the treadmill of more. It's more than just time off. Sometimes you've had a day off where you've just sat on the sofa, you've watched Netflix, you've poured cereal into your mouth straight from the box, and that doesn't refuel you, it doesn't re-energize you, and you go back into Monday's rhythm and you somehow feel flat. Sabbath is way more than just time off. It's something that is refueling and recreating and re-energizing and refocusing. And so there's something purposeful about it. If you've started a Sabbath rhythm of any sort, what you might have noticed is this fear or this insecurity that kind of rises up. It feels uncomfortable just to stop and do nothing. There's no output to point to and say to the whole of the rest of the world, hey look, I'm really important, look at what I created, when you just stop. For me, I get to the end of the day and I think, oh, I haven't achieved anything. I haven't done anything. I'm not of worth. And I think that's because so often I want to be valuable, and stopping makes me vulnerable. I feel vulnerable. I feel like I haven't given anything, contributed enough. So if that's you and you've started a Sabbath rhythm and that's how you're feeling and that's the thing that's making you stop, push past it. But remember and notice it, because that's a sign that you're running too hard, too fast, and you need to stop. And we need to invest in our soul and in our spirit. And once you stop, you remember this, that our Christian faith, the way of Jesus, is not built on output. You're not loved because of what you've done. You're loved because of, well, that's what God does. He is love. He loves you. He created you. And our faith is not built on output and accumulation and effort. It's built on relationship. It's built on grace. It's built on mercy. It's built on your identity being not in what you've achieved, but in who and how you are. There's this guy called Pete Scazzero who writes brilliantly on emotionally healthy spirituality. If you get a chance, check out any of his writings. And when speaking about Sabbath, he says, embrace Sabbath as the primary delivery mechanism for God's love. If you want to experience God's love in your life, he says embrace Sabbath and weave that rhythm and that ritual into your life. He says Sabbath has 4 elements. The first of the 4 elements is that Sabbath is core to spiritual formation. That's what we're doing at the moment. We are forming ourselves as spiritual beings. Second, to see Sabbath as resistance. That's what we're looking at in this episode. To see Sabbath as play is number 3. Whoa. To understand Sabbath as revelation of God's love is number 4. So to understand Sabbath, we need to understand the context into which the command, the gift, was given. Now, if you know anything about musicals, you know that Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat have led this family down to Egypt. And this was a time before there were nation states and there were families. And so Joseph's family, the Israelites, have now moved down to Egypt. And over hundreds and hundreds of years, they do what people do, and there's lots more of them after hundreds and hundreds of years. Only the Egyptians don't really like this people group that sprung up amidst them, and so they force them into slavery. They give them the worst of the worst jobs. They treat them as outcasts. They abuse their power over this Israelite people group. Eventually, there's this one guy called Moses who just flips in response to this, and he murders this Egyptian slave driver. He goes out into the desert trying to escape for his life, and in the desert he has this experience where God speaks to him and grabs hold of him and shakes him by the shoulders and said, Moses, I got stuff for you to do, and one of the things I want you to do is to lead my people out of Egypt. They're not supposed to be there. I'm going to give them a place of their own, and I'm going to form them as my people, distinct from the other people around them. And so you might know the story, this is cutting it really short. The people get out of Egypt and they end up wandering around the desert for 40 years looking for land. During that time, they get given, and you'll have heard of this even if you're not a churchy person, the big 10 commandments. One of which is remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. We've spoken about this before. It's this gift of time off. Now, here's why it's resistance. Imagine, if you can, a culture where overwork and slave labor is a thing. Imagine, if you can, a culture where power is held up as the ultimate idol. Imagine, if you can, a culture where the measure of a man is the amount that he's able to produce and the level to which he rises in society. Imagine, if you can, a culture where a woman is measured purely by her sex appeal. Imagine, if you can, a culture where if you're strong enough, you can take advantage of the weak and you can make them do whatever you want. Imagine, if you can, a culture where God is forced on top of people. Imagine, if you can, a culture where you are understood to follow God, not by what you do in secret, but by how high you go in your fundamental drive to follow him and the extreme lengths that you might go to prove that you're one of these God followers. Imagine, if you can, a culture like that. And so then to people born into that culture, living in that culture, God says, stop, pause, rest. Build into your way of being a day of resistance. A day when you stick it to the man. John Mark Comer says it's guerrilla warfare. A day when to all of the forces that beat down on your levels of contentment, you stop and you say, no more. The adverts don't come into my eyes and to my mind today. Today I am happy with what I have. What if to the forces that pull your attention and divide it from itself, never mind the other people in your family, and pull you in different directions, what if to those forces you rebel and you say, no, today we're not going to be pulled away by work emails and by projects over here and by to-do lists over there and by competing demands for attention and by 6 screens in 6 rooms. Today we pause, we stop, and we reconvene and we spend time together. What if to the forces that say you need to buy more, to achieve more, to work harder, to work out more, you say, no, today I stop. To the empire that says you need to look better, look younger, look thinner, work on your body more, you say, stop. I am good with myself today. To a boss that keeps emailing and the notifications that keep dominating your mind, you say, stop. If we zoom out a little bit and we say to an empire which makes children on the other side of the world work in slave conditions so that I can buy this t-shirt at a price that doesn't mean all that much to me, that I say, stop. I don't need to buy more today. I'm going to be part of a system of resistance. This is the resistance that the Sabbath writers speak about, that you resist the empire. There's this old cheesy saying, but it said it took just a matter of moments to get the people out of Egypt, but it took years and maybe still hasn't happened to get Egypt out of the people. This point was there was this empire, this force which was a driver of more and accumulating and stuff, and where evil won. And the point now is that we want to create a rhythm of rest and recreation and of focusing on different things and of play and of joy and delight and refusing to be part of the empire for a day. And this is a beautiful piece of resistance that isn't open to everybody and sometimes feels like you need to do it in secret, but it just says to this empire, no, not me, you don't get me today. And this empire is pervasive, right? It even happens in lockdown. Did you notice that when lockdown started, there were all these voices that jumped straight onto social media and they said, great, in this time that you've got, don't sit in the time, don't rest in the time, don't enjoy the time, don't embrace the time as a gift. No. In that time that you've got, why don't you learn to do vegan knitting? And why don't you learn to take up Egyptian hieroglyphs? And why don't you become fluent in 16 different European languages? Because if I'm not valuable, if I'm not doing stuff, if I'm not achieving stuff, if I can't account for my presence in the world, I'm not enough. Sabbath says, you're enough, as you are, created as you are, right back to page 1 of the story, because you're created by a loving God in his image. And you don't need to pile stuff on top of that. And so here's the question, do you feel valuable when you're not producing? Do you feel vulnerable when you stop? What are the reaches that the empire has into your life? Where does it get its claws onto you and drag you under? How could you resist the empire by building a rhythm of Sabbath this week?